In the heart of a sprawling galaxy, where stars burned like scattered jewels against the velvet expanse, the planet Zythera loomed as a jewel itself, a world cloaked in shimmering opalescent clouds and bathed in perpetual twilight. Its surface was a kaleidoscope of crystalline structures that refracted light into cascading rainbows, casting an ethereal glow across its jagged mountains and sprawling valleys. It was here, amidst this otherworldly beauty, that the alien queen reigned supreme. Her name carried weight across the cosmos: Queen Saria, sovereign of Zythera, mistress of the void-born empire. She stood tall even among her own kind, her presence commanding awe with every step she took. Her body was encased in iridescent armor forged from the rarest minerals found only on her homeworld, each plate etched with intricate runes that pulsed faintly with energy. Her elongated limbs moved with deliberate grace, while her angular features were framed by a crown of living crystal tendrils that writhed softly, responding to her emotions like sentient beings bound to her will. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire, twin orbs of molten gold that seemed capable of piercing through flesh and bone to glimpse the soul beneath. Sarathia's voice carried authority beyond mere words. It resonated deep within the bones of those who heard it, whether they were her loyal subjects or conquered foes. For centuries, she had ruled over not just Zythera but dozens of worlds scattered throughout the empire, her dominion expanding with ruthless efficiency. Entire civilizations had fallen before her armies, their leaders bowing low in submission, their people reduced to servitude or worse. Resistance was futile, not because her forces were invincible, though they were formidable, but because defiance brought consequences so dire that surrender often felt like mercy. The throne room of Zythera's capital city exemplified both her power and her majesty. Towering spires of black obsidian spiraled upward, disappearing into the mist above, while rivers of liquid light flowed along channels carved into the floor, illuminating the space with shifting hues of violet and silver. At its center sat her throne, a monolithic construct of polished stone and pulsating veins of bioluminescent material. Chains hung suspended around it, relics of past conquests, each one symbolizing a species broken under her rule. The air hummed with latent energy, charged by the countless void-born warriors stationed at attention along the walls, their weapons gleaming dully in the dim light. Yet for all her might, there was something restless about Saria. Beneath her regal exterior lay a simmering curiosity, a hunger for new challenges to conquer. Over time, the victories had grown predictable, almost mundane. Few dared oppose her now, and fewer still posed any real threat. This ennui gnawed at her, leaving her yearning for something, or someone, who could ignite a spark of unpredictability in her otherwise flawless reign. It was during one such moment of contemplation that news reached her. A human vessel had strayed too close to Zythera's borders. Humans, an enigmatic species known more for their tenacity than their strength, whose fragile bodies and short lifespans made them seem almost laughable compared to the Voidborn. Yet these creatures had proven surprisingly resilient, carving out colonies on distant planets despite their limitations. Some whispered they possessed a peculiar cunning, an ability to adapt and survive where others would falter. Intrigued, Saria ordered the ship captured intact, its crew brought before her unharmed. As the prisoner was led into the throne room, shackled and flanked by guards twice his size, Saria leaned forward slightly, studying him with keen interest. He was small, yes, and his plain gray uniform did little to distinguish him from the countless others she had seen paraded before her. But there was something in his posture, a quiet defiance that refused to be extinguished even in the face of overwhelming odds. His dark eyes met hers without hesitation, steady and unwavering, betraying no trace of fear. For the first time in decades, Saria felt a flicker of anticipation. Perhaps this human would provide the challenge she craved. Perhaps he would prove worthy of more than just another chain added to her collection. Or perhaps, he would surprise her in ways she could not yet imagine. The human stood before Queen Saria, his hands bound tightly behind his back, yet his posture remained defiantly upright. His gaze never wavered, meeting the molten gold of her eyes with an intensity that bordered on insolence. Around him, the throne room buzzed with murmurs of disbelief and disdain from the assembled void-born courtiers. Such audacity was unheard of. Prisoners typically trembled, begged, or collapsed under the sheer weight of Saratia's presence. But this man, this frail, insignificant creature, seemed utterly unfazed. "You stand before me," Saria began, her voice reverberating through the chamber like rolling thunder. "A trespasser in my domain, a speck of dust daring to cross paths with a star. She rose slowly from her throne, her towering form casting a shadow that engulfed the human entirely. "Kneel." Her command hung heavy in the air, laden with expectation. Every eye in the room turned toward the prisoner, waiting for the inevitable collapse, the groveling plea for mercy. Instead, the human tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, with deliberate calm, he spoke. "No." The single syllable sliced through the silence like a blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a tense hush. Even Sarathia froze mid-step, her glowing eyes narrowing as she processed what she had just heard. No one, had ever defied her so openly. Not here, not in her own throne room, surrounded by the symbols of her absolute authority. "You dare!" she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The chains hanging near her throne rattled faintly, as if stirred by her rising anger. "Do you know who I am? What I can do to you?" The human's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though it held no warmth. "I know exactly who you are," he replied, his tone measured but laced with steel. "And I also know what happens when people kneel without understanding why. They lose themselves, their dignity, their humanity." His words struck a chord within the chamber, sending ripples of unease through the gathered voidborn. To them, submission was natural, expected, a reflexive act ingrained since birth. The concept of resisting such power was alien, incomprehensible. And yet, here was this human, speaking of dignity as though it were worth more than life itself. Sarathia stepped closer, her towering frame looming over him like a storm cloud about to unleash its fury. "You think your defiance makes you strong?" she demanded, her voice rising. "It makes you foolish. You are nothing. A fleeting spark in the vast darkness of eternity. Kneeling will not diminish you, it will spare you." To her astonishment, the human chuckled softly, a sound that carried neither mockery nor fear. "Spare me?" he echoed, tilting his head again. "From what? Torture? Death? Those are temporary inconveniences. What I won't spare myself from is becoming something less than human. Something like you." The insult landed with the force of a meteor strike. Sarathia staggered back a step, her expression twisting into a mask of rage and disbelief. How dare he compare her to anything lesser? She was perfection incarnate, the pinnacle of evolution, the embodiment of order and dominance. And yet, the way he said it, with such quiet conviction, made her pause. There was no malice in his tone, only truth as he saw it. That somehow made it worse. "Enough!" she snapped, raising a hand to signal her guards. Two massive void-born warriors stepped forward, their weapons trained on the human. "Take him away. Break him. Remind him of his place." But as the guards moved to seize him, the human spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Breaking me won't change what I am. You can crush my body, but you'll never touch my soul. And deep down, you know it." For a moment, Sarathia hesitated. The certainty in his voice unnerved her, shaking the foundations of everything she believed about power and control. Defiance should have been eradicated long ago, ground into dust beneath the heel of her empire. Yet here it stood, alive and unyielding, staring her down with eyes that refused to look away. Finally, she gestured sharply, dismissing the guards. "Leave us," she commanded, her voice cold but tinged with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or frustration. As the room emptied, leaving only her and the human, she circled him slowly, studying him like a predator sizing up prey that refused to flee. "What is your name?" she asked after a long silence, her tone softer now, almost contemplative. "Elias," he replied without hesitation. "And yours?" She blinked, momentarily taken aback by the question. No one had ever asked her name before. Titles sufficed for most. "Still," she answered, her voice carrying a note of reluctant amusement. "Sarathia." "Sarathia," Elias repeated, testing the syllables as if savoring their weight. A fitting name for someone who rules with such finality. Her jaw tightened at the subtle jab, but she let it slide. "For now. Why are you here, Elias? Why risk everything to come to my world?" He shrugged as best he could with his hands bound. Curiosity, I suppose. Humans aren't great at staying put. We explore. We push boundaries. Sometimes we stumble into places we shouldn't. And sometimes, she countered, her voice sharpening, we destroy those who trespass where they don't belong. True, Elias admitted. But destruction isn't always the answer. Sometimes, it's just lazy. The word hung between them, sharp and unexpected. Lazy. As if her centuries of conquest and domination amounted to nothing more than indolence. Sarathia bristled, her pride stung once again. Yet beneath the indignation, a seed of doubt began to take root. Could there be another way? Another path she hadn't considered? Before she could pursue the thought further, Elias shifted slightly, drawing her attention back to him. Tell me, Sarathia, he said, his tone turning serious. Have you ever wondered what it's like to truly understand someone, not just conquer them, but see the world through their eyes? She frowned, caught off guard by the question. Understanding was irrelevant in her empire. Obedience was all that mattered. Why would I waste my time on such trivialities? She retorted. Power doesn't require empathy. Maybe not, Elias conceded. But maybe power without empathy is hollow. Empty. Like ruling over shadows instead of people. Her chest tightened at his words, though she couldn't say why. Shadows. Was that all her empire amounted to? A collection of broken spirits and extinguished flames? She shook her head, trying to dispel the unsettling thought. Enough philosophy, she snapped. You're still a prisoner. Your fate remains in my hands. Does it? Elias challenged, his gaze locking onto hers once more. Or does my refusal to submit make you question how much control you really have? Sarathia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, her thoughts swirling like a tempest. This human was dangerous, not because of any physical threat he posed, but because of the questions he forced her to confront. Questions she didn't want to answer. Without another word, she turned and strode back to her throne, signaling for the guards to return. Take him to the holding cells, she ordered, her voice clipped. We'll deal with him later. As Elias was led away, Sarathia sank into her seat, her mind racing. For the first time in centuries, she felt uncertain, vulnerable, and strangely, intrigued. Days passed, though time held little meaning for Sarathia. She paced the confines of her private chambers, her thoughts consumed by the human named Elias. His defiance lingered in her mind like an unshakable shadow, haunting her with questions she could neither ignore nor answer. What was it about him that unsettled her so deeply? Was it his refusal to submit, or the quiet confidence with which he carried himself? Or was it something more, a challenge to the very foundation of her reign? She summoned her advisors, seeking clarity. They arrived promptly, their armored forms filling the room with an oppressive sense of duty. Each bore the scars of countless battles, their loyalty to her unquestionable. Yet when she broached the subject of Elias, their responses were cautious, almost fearful. "My queen," began Vorthak, her most trusted general, his voice low and measured. "This human is dangerous. His insolence must be crushed swiftly, lest it inspire rebellion among the weaker races." Sarathia nodded absently, though her mind wandered elsewhere. Rebellion was a constant threat, yes, but she doubted Elias harbored such ambitions. His defiance felt personal, intimate even, as if directed solely at her rather than her empire. "And if I choose not to punish him," she mused aloud, watching their reactions closely. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. It was Arindra, the high priestess of the void-born faith, who finally spoke. "Your Majesty, mercy is a luxury we cannot afford. The chains of your throne represent the subjugation of all who oppose you. To show weakness now would unravel everything you have built." Weakness. The word struck a nerve. Was that what this was? Had Elias exposed some hidden flaw within her? Sarathia clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. No. She was not weak. She was the strongest being in the galaxy, feared and revered by millions. Yet the doubt persisted. gnawing at her resolve. Dismissive of their counsel, Sarathia retreated to her observation deck, a secluded chamber overlooking the crystalline forests of Zithara. From here, she could watch the shifting colors of the landscape, a reminder of the beauty and order she had cultivated. But today, the view offered no solace. Her thoughts kept returning to Elias, to the way he had looked at her, not with hatred or fear, but with something akin to pity. Pity. The notion infuriated her, yet it also intrigued her. Summoning her courage, she decided to visit him personally. The holding cells were located deep within the palace, a labyrinth of cold stone and dim lighting designed to break the spirit of even the most resilient prisoners. As she descended, accompanied only by a pair of silent guards, she felt an unfamiliar flutter of apprehension. What would she find when she reached him? Would he still defy her, or had the isolation worn him down? When she entered his cell, she found Elias seated cross-legged on the floor, his posture relaxed despite the harsh conditions. His uniform was rumpled, his face smudged with dirt, but his eyes remained clear and focused. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Back for more?" he asked, his tone light but edged with challenge. Sarathia ignored the jab, stepping closer until she towered over him. "Why do you persist in this folly?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and curiosity. "Do you not realize the futility of your resistance?" Elias smiled faintly, leaning back against the wall. "Futility is subjective. To you, perhaps, my actions seem pointless. But to me, they mean everything." Her frustration boiled over. "Everything? You cling to pride while facing annihilation. Explain yourself." He regarded her steadily, his gaze unwavering. "Pride isn't what keeps me going. It's purpose. Belief. Knowing that some things are worth fighting for, even if the odds are stacked against you." Sarathia faltered, her composure cracking under the weight of his words. Purpose. Belief. These were concepts foreign to her, relics of a time before her rise to power. She had built her empire on strength and fear, crushing dissent and rewarding obedience. But Elias spoke of something different, something intangible yet undeniably powerful. "What purpose could possibly justify your defiance?" she pressed, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "What belief drives you to face death without flinching?" Elias hesitated, his expression softening. "Freedom," he said simply. "The freedom to choose, to think, to feel. To be more than just a cog in someone else's machine." The simplicity of his answer stunned her. Freedom. A concept she had long dismissed as irrelevant, a luxury afforded only to the weak. Yet hearing it spoken with such conviction made her reconsider. Could there be value in allowing others to chart their own paths, however chaotic or unpredictable? Her internal conflict raged on, pulling her in opposing directions. On one hand, she yearned to crush Elias, to prove once and for all that her power was absolute. On the other, she found herself drawn to his ideals, to the possibility of a world shaped not by force, but by choice. As the hours stretched into days, Sarathia withdrew further into solitude, grappling with the implications of Elias's words. She roamed the crystalline halls of her palace, her steps echoing hollowly in the vast emptiness. The grandeur that once filled her with pride now seemed oppressive, a gilded cage reflecting the constraints she had imposed upon herself and others. Her empire, built on submission and fear, suddenly felt brittle, its foundations shaky beneath the weight of newfound doubts. One evening, as the opalescent clouds of Zithara cast shifting patterns of light across her chambers, Sarathia summoned Elias once more. This time, she came alone, leaving her guards outside the door. The decision startled even herself. Vulnerability was a luxury she rarely afforded, yet something about Elias compelled her to lower her defenses. When she entered his cell, she found him standing near the window, gazing out at the surreal landscape beyond. He turned as she approached, his expression calm but alert. "You've returned," he said, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. "To what do I owe this honor?" Sarathia hesitated, her usual poise faltering under the weight of unspoken questions. "I need to understand," she admitted, her words halting. "Your defiance. Your beliefs. They unsettle me." Elias raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her candor. Unsettle you? I thought queens weren't supposed to get unsettled. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile before she suppressed it. Perhaps not. But rulers are still beings, flawed and fallible. Tell me, Elias, why do you fight so fiercely for freedom? What does it mean to you? He studied her for a moment, as if gauging her sincerity, then sighed softly. Freedom means autonomy. Voice. The ability to shape your own destiny, rather than having it dictated by someone else. It's messy, yes, and often painful. But it's also beautiful. Without freedom, life becomes mechanical, predictable, empty. Her chest tightened at his words, resonating with a part of her she had long buried. Once, before the crown and the chains, she too had dreamed of exploration, of forging her own path. But those dreams had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition, replaced by the relentless pursuit of power. Now, standing before Elias, she felt the ghost of those aspirations stirring once more. And what of chaos? She countered, her voice tinged with skepticism. Freedom breeds disorder, rebellion. How can you trust others to wield it responsibly? Elias chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. You can't. That's the risk. But isn't it better to live in a world where people choose their actions, even if they make mistakes, than one where they're forced into compliance? True growth comes from struggle, not obedience. Her mind raced, torn between the logic of his argument and the ingrained doctrines of her rule. For centuries, she had equated control with stability, believing that order could only be maintained through domination. Yet Elias painted a different picture, one of resilience born from adversity, of strength forged through choice. Could such a system truly work? Or would it collapse under the weight of its own contradictions? I don't know if I can embrace your vision, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. My empire. It's built on submission. To change course now would be terrifying, Elias finished for her, his tone gentle. Change always is. But fear shouldn't dictate your decisions. Imagine what you could create if you trusted others to rise to the occasion instead of forcing them into line. Her breath caught in her throat, the enormity of his suggestion crashing over her like a tidal wave. Trust. It was a concept alien to her, yet it sparked a flicker of hope deep within her core. Could she transform her empire without destroying it? Could she become something more than a tyrant, something greater? Before she could respond, the door to the cell burst open, revealing Vortak and a contingent of guards. Their weapons were drawn, their expressions grim. My queen, Vortak barked, his voice urgent. We intercepted communications from the human fleet. They're mobilizing, preparing to attack. Sarathia's blood ran cold. An invasion? Here, on Zithra? She turned to Elias, searching his face for any sign of deception. But his expression remained unchanged, calm and resolute. Did you know about this? She demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. Elias shook his head. No. But I'm not surprised. Humans don't abandon their own easily. Her mind raced, torn between conflicting impulses. If she acted now, she could crush the approaching fleet, eradicating the threat before it reached her borders. Yet doing so would mean abandoning the fragile connection she had begun to forge with Elias, severing the thread of possibility he represented. Was it worth sacrificing everything for the sake of maintaining control? As the seconds ticked by, Sarathia realized she faced a choice far greater than any battlefield strategy. This was a test of her character, her values. Could she rise above the cycle of conquest and destruction that had defined her reign? Or would she succumb to the familiar pull of power, silencing dissent with fire and steel? With a heavy heart, she turned to Vortak. Prepare the defenses, she ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. But hold your fire unless provoked. I will not start a war based on assumptions. Vortak hesitated, clearly displeased, but ultimately bowed in deference. As you command, my queen. As the guards filed out, leaving her alone with Elias once more, Sarathia sank onto the edge of the cot, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. What have I done? She murmured, more to herself than to him. Elias knelt beside her, his demeanor unexpectedly tender. You've chosen uncertainty over certainty. That's the first step toward change. She glanced at him, her golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. And if I fail? If my empire crumbles because of this? He placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture startlingly intimate. Then you rebuild. Stronger. Better. Because sometimes, failure is just another beginning. For the first time in centuries, Sarathia allowed herself to cry, the weight of her doubts and fears spilling forth in silent waves. And as Elias sat beside her, offering quiet support, she began to envision a future unlike anything she had ever known, a future shaped not by chains, but by choices. The tension aboard the human flagship crackled like static electricity, every crew member acutely aware of the stakes. Captain Miles, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for tactical brilliance, paced the bridge, his eyes darting between the holographic displays mapping the approach to Zithra. The planet loomed ahead, its shimmering atmosphere a deceptive veil hiding the dangers within. Intelligence reports had confirmed the presence of void-born fleets amassing near the borders, ready to intercept any incursion. Yet Miles knew hesitation wasn't an option. Elias was out there, and whatever awaited them on Zithra, they couldn't leave him behind. "Weapon systems online," reported Lieutenant Kara, her fingers flying over the console. "Shields at maximum capacity. Engines primed for evasive maneuvers." Miles nodded curtly, his jaw tightening. "Good. Keep scanning for anomalies. If Sarathia's playing games, we need to stay 2 steps ahead." The crew worked with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized despite the mounting pressure. Among them was Dr. Ilara Voss, the ship's chief strategist and one of Elias's closest confidants. Her pale face was etched with worry as she analyzed data streams pouring in from reconnaissance drones. "Captain," she said quietly, drawing his attention. "There's something unusual about their defensive formations. They're holding back." Miles frowned, leaning over her shoulder to study the readouts. Sure enough, the void-born ships appeared to be maintaining a defensive perimeter rather than launching preemptive strikes. It was an uncharacteristic move, given Sarathia's history of aggression. "Could be a trap," he muttered, straightening. Or she's giving us a chance to talk," Ilara finished, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Elias has always believed in the potential for change. Maybe he's gotten through to her." Miles snorted, though there was no real derision in the sound. "Hope's a dangerous thing, document. Let's not bank on it until we see proof." As the fleet drew closer to Zithra's orbit, communication channels crackled to life. A voice emerged, cold and commanding, yet oddly restrained. "Human vessels, this is Queen Sarathia of Zithra. State your intentions or prepare to be neutralized." Miles exchanged a glance with Ilara before stepping up to the comm panel. "Queen Sarathia, this is Captain Miles of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We're here for our ambassador, Elias. Harm him, and you'll regret it." There was a pause, long enough to make the crew uneasy. Then Sarathia's voice returned, softer this time, almost contemplative. "Elias is unharmed. But his presence here has sparked complications. If you wish to retrieve him, you must meet my terms." Miles stiffened, suspicion flaring. "What terms?" "A delegation. 3 representatives. Unarmed. You will land on the designated coordinates and negotiate directly. Any attempt at subterfuge will result in immediate retaliation." The captain hesitated, weighing the risks. Sending unarmed personnel into the heart of enemy territory was madness, yet refusing would likely trigger the very conflict they sought to avoid. After a tense moment, he turned to Ilara. "You're coming with me. Pick one other." Ilara didn't hesitate. "Lieutenant Kara. She's quick on her feet and can handle herself in a pinch." Minutes later, the trio boarded a shuttle, descending toward Zithra's surface under the watchful gaze of void-born patrols. The landscape below was breathtaking, a kaleidoscope of crystalline structures and flowing rivers of light. Yet none of them had the luxury of admiring the view. As they touched down on a landing platform surrounded by towering spires, A contingent of void-born soldiers awaited them, weapons drawn but not raised. Sarathia herself appeared moments later, her regal bearing unmistakable even amidst the imposing figures flanking her. Her golden eyes locked onto Miles, then flicked to Alara and Kara. "You've shown remarkable restraint," she said, her tone measured. "Let us see if your intentions match your actions." Miles stepped forward, his stance firm despite the overwhelming odds. "Where's Elias?" Sarathia gestured, and a side door slid open to reveal Elias walking calmly toward them. His appearance drew audible gasps from the delegation. He looked tired but unbroken, his eyes alight with determination. "Captain," he greeted, his voice steady. "I assume reinforcements were necessary?" Miles managed a tight smile. "Figured you might need backup. Turns out I was right." Elias chuckled, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" Before further pleasantries could be exchanged, Sarathia interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. "Enough. We have matters to discuss. Follow me." She led them into the palace, her stride purposeful as she guided them through corridors lined with opulent tapestries and glowing runes. The delegation followed in silence, their senses heightened, every instinct screaming caution. When they reached a large chamber adorned with floating holograms displaying star charts and military formations, Sarathia turned to face them. "I won't pretend this meeting is purely altruistic," she began, her voice carrying a mix of authority and vulnerability. "Your arrival has forced me to confront truths I'd rather ignore. Elias has challenged my beliefs, my methods. And now, I find myself questioning whether my empire can endure without them." Alara stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy, Your Majesty. But clinging to fear and control only perpetuates cycles of suffering. Humanity has faced extinction-level threats before. What saved us wasn't strength or superiority, it was unity, cooperation, trust." Sarathia's gaze flickered, uncertainty flashing across her features. "Trust is a fragile thing. How can I ensure it won't be betrayed?" "It's a risk," Elias admitted, stepping beside Alara. "But isn't leadership about taking risks? About believing in something greater than yourself?" The Queen's jaw tightened, her internal struggle evident. Finally, she exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Very well. I propose a truce, a trial period during which we explore coexistence rather than conquest. But know this, betrayal will not be tolerated." Miles nodded, relief washing over him. "Fair enough. We'll extend the same courtesy." As the negotiations continued, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Tension gave way to tentative collaboration, each side cautiously probing the other's intentions. For the first time in centuries, Sarathia found herself listening, not just to words, but to the underlying hopes and fears driving them. And for the humans, the realization dawned that perhaps the Voidborn weren't so different from themselves, bound by shared desires for security, purpose, and belonging. Yet even as progress was made, shadows lingered at the edges of the room. Outside the palace walls, whispers of dissent spread among the Voidborn ranks, rumors of weakness and compromise fueling unrest. Within the delegation, doubts simmered about whether peace could truly take root in soil soaked with centuries of bloodshed. By the time the sun dipped below Zithra's horizon, casting the chamber in hues of violet and silver, the outlines of an agreement had been sketched. But as Sarathia dismissed the group for the night, her gaze lingered on Elias, a mixture of gratitude and trepidation in her eyes. The path ahead was fraught with peril, and neither side could predict where it might lead. In the quiet hours that followed, as the palace settled into an uneasy stillness, Sarathia stood alone on her balcony, gazing out at the crystalline forests bathed in moonlight. The weight of her decision pressed heavily upon her, a burden she had never anticipated carrying. Change, she realized, was not merely a choice, it was a journey, one fraught with uncertainty and sacrifice. And though the road ahead remained shrouded in mystery, she felt, for the first time in centuries, a glimmer of hope. Profile. Quen 2.5 Max. 11:30 a.m. As the first rays of Zithra's twin suns pierced the horizon, Sarathia made her choice. She would dismantle the chains that had long symbolized her reign, replacing them with bridges of understanding. Elias stood beside her, his quiet confidence unwavering, as she addressed her people, declaring a new era of cooperation. The Voidborn listened in stunned silence, their queen transformed before their eyes. Miles and his crew returned to their fleet, carrying not weapons but promises of peace. Yet even as hope blossomed, shadows lingered. Dissent among the Voidborn threatened to unravel everything. In the end, Sarathia knew the true test lay ahead, proving that trust could endure where fear once ruled. As Elias took her hand, she realized she no longer faced this challenge alone. Together, they stepped into an uncertain future, guided by the fragile light of possibility. And for the first time, Sarathia allowed herself to believe in a world beyond conquest, a world worth fighting for.